The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Zag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, and across the moat from Oakland. I do something a little unusual in podcast. I always, without an exception, speak to some of the most interesting people on the planet, and today is no exception. DB Firstman is my guest, who is in the process of writing a baseball book. And as most of my listeners know, I'm kind of a baseball-crazed human being, and DB has been on these airwaves, either on Comfortably Zone. I think, DB, you were on with Peter Golenbach and I a while back.
That is correct. Yes.
Boy, I do have a memory.
DB
Firstman, welcome back to the airwaves.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
All right. What's going on? You got a baseball book going, and I want to hear the progress you've made. First of all, what have you entitled it?
Okay, well, I'm going for the longest title of a baseball book to be published in 2020. We're going with Hall of Name, Baseball's Most Magnificent Monikers, from the Only Nolan to Van Lingo Mungo, and more. We're going to fit that. We're going to fit that all on the spine of a book. Yes.
Few people know. They all know Nolan Ryan, but Van Lingo Mungo. That was a wonderful song by
yes, it was.
A gentleman whose name is much like yours. Am I correct? Who wrote that?
Oh, I'm trying. Yeah, I believe that's something close to it. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank on it. I'm doing the Google right now, if you'll pardon me. But
okay, well, name of it is Van Lingo Mungo.
Yes, Dave Frischberg.
Frischberg, boy.
Yes, 1969. He was a jazz pianist. Came up with a song based on baseball player names, and he named it Van Lingo Mungo. Yes.
Yes, he did. And the names. It was such an iconic hit. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I would play a little bit for it, but all our episodes are archived on YouTube, and I don't want to get into any copyright problems yet again. In 8 years, we go to bat every 2 or 3 days. I've resolved not to fight that kind of fight anymore.
Yeah, so, use your energies elsewhere. Yes.
Such as my energies are in my dotage. But by the same token, I still, even though I'm an old guy, I still have an interest for people's passion. And yours is baseball as well as mine, but you're taking it out, you're taking your energy out constructively. And tell me how the book is coming.
Okay, well, the book had its genesis back in late 2018, December. It grew out of a column that I had in my blog. My blog was Value Over Replacement Grit, and occasionally I would write about memorable names in baseball history. Not necessarily the most memorable players. You know, we're not talking Mickey Mantle necessarily, but players whose names were memorable in and of themselves. And so I would write about their careers, the etymologies of their names, the highlights, what they did before and after their careers were over, how they got their names, whether their parents were, stuck on a name and they picked one out of a hat, things of that nature. And I decided to write a book about these names because I had this vision for the book maybe about seven or 8 years ago, and I brought it to a bunch of independent niche book publishers, and they said, personally, we love the concept, but it's just not going to sell. And so I stashed that dream away for a while, and then the self-publishing world opened up. And anybody who wanted to publish a book, the internet gave them the opportunity to stake their claim and write their own book. So flash forward to 2018, late 2018, I'm looking for something to write about. I want to write a book. I want to get my name out there. And I decide, you know what? I'm going to write the book about the best baseball names of all time. So I researched 100 names of inactive ball players. I chose inactive ball players because the career biographies would already be written. The data and the words would already be in print somewhere. It would just be easier. It would be easier to research.
Yeah. And nothing would be outdated as soon as it became published.
Right. So I basically took players going back as far as the 1870s through 2010 and chose them based on whether they had an alliterative name like Boof Bonzer or Coco Crisp, or they had, sort of a naughty name like Pete Lecoq and Rusty Kuntz, or just a name which you don't know how they got it, what their parents were thinking of. For example, there is a player who had a cup of coffee with the Yankees named Zealous Wheeler. And it turns out their parents just made the name up. They had no genesis for the name other than they liked the way it sounded. So he was Zealous. And the kicker is Zealous had a child and named the child Zethan, Zethan, in honor of Zealous.
In the same spirit of
his parent. Right.
That's wonderful.
So the book is 100 profiles with pictures and profile of their baseball career, what they've done before and after, a little trivia about their lives, anagrams of their names. I have a section not to be confused with because sometimes the names can be confused with other people and places. And then, so I've written 100 profiles. I have a foreword written by Jason Stark.
Wow.
Yeah. So Jason is a big
Jason.
Yes, he is, and Jason is a big fan of mine, and he reaches out to me quite often on Twitter, looking for help with names, whether particular names have done, things like, rhyme batteries with names that rhymed, like Dylan G. and I don't know, Frank Lee or something like that, where there's some sort of quirkiness to a particular name. Jason has reached out to me, so I asked him to write the foreword for the book, and he has provided me a wonderful foreword, and so I'm happy to have it in the book. And then we have a back cover blurb by none other than John Thorne, the official historian for Major League Baseball. So we have some
class.
Yeah, we have some cachet here. So the book is pretty much written. I've got the cover pretty much. I have an illustrator for the cover. The cover is pretty much done, and we're pulling the manuscript together. I'm hoping to have preview copies out in about 4 weeks, and then the book should be ready to go late March of next year.
Wow. What that'd be like a year and a half.
Yep.
That's all. And,
yep.
That's going at a great pace. what is your writing style like? How do you write by appointment? Did you make an appointment with yourself that I'm going to write from 9 to 5 or whatever? Do you write when the spirit hits you? Do you take notes during the day of things you think of? What's it like being a writer from your standpoint?
Well, writing is not my vocation. I actually am a career civil servant. I have a 9 to 5 job with the City of New York. As a data analyst, I crunch numbers all day. So the number crunching satisfies one part of my brain, and the writing satisfies the other part of my brain. And when there are downtimes at work, I would find time to do research on the book. And then when I would get home at night, have a quick bite to eat and then settle in for research and writing. And the writing style, I'm looking for this book to be sort of threading the needle between a reference book and a humor book. I'm looking for it to entertain and inform the reader. Right. I want them to understand that yes, these players had interesting names, but they also in many cases had interesting careers and personal lives, whether they were subject to discrimination, for example, being one of the first Native American players or one of the first Jewish players in the pros. So there are stories behind the name, that go beyond just isn't that an interesting name? There are stories about their lives that really should be told, and that's what I'm going for with the book. I really want to show that yes, it's meant to be lighthearted and fun, but we're also trying to educate and inform that these people with these interesting names had interesting lives beyond them.
Wow, you've developed your concept since the last time I spoke immensely. I mean, it was just, initially it was just names that were interesting and putting those names together and what have you. Now you've really got an idea. You've got something going. That's terrific.
Right, and I think part of what drove me was, it's relatively simple to look at a name and say, oh, that's interesting, ha, 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 or, chuckle, chuckle, chuckle. But really, if you want to go, that would be a really simplistic book. That would just be look at the name and chuckle at it. But, these people had lives. These people either took a name for, they were given a birth name, and really what I'm writing about here are people not necessarily known by a nickname. I'm not going for nicknames. I'm not going for Catfish Hunter and people like that. I'm going for, people like Lip Pike, whose first name was Lipman, and he was one of the first professional baseball players and the first Jewish pro player. He has a tremendous story about being one of the first pro players and first Jewish pro player in baseball history, beyond having a really cool name. And I really wanted to get into making this more than just a look at the name and chuckle at it. I really wanted to tell a story, and there are 100 stories behind these 100 names. And
are you interviewing any of these people? Have you talked to any of them? Or
I didn't talk to any of them. I did try to reach out to a couple of the players for background information on the etymology of their names. In some cases, for example, most of my research into the etymology of the names, I had reference books, dictionaries of surnames, dictionaries of given names. Ancestry.com helped me a lot. Newspapers.com helped me a lot. But in some cases, there were no entries as to how this person came up with this first name, their given name. Like, for example, I had Larvel Blanks. I believe he was a outfielder for the Braves, I want to say, in the late 70s, early 80s, maybe for the Indians
he was
also.
From Sacramento, California.
Ah, okay. Well, I looked everywhere for Larvell's, origin story in terms of his name, because it's a rather unusual, atypical first name, and I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find a listing in any of the reference books. I couldn't find it on newspapers.com or Ancestry. So I consulted I have a list of addresses for baseball players. I wrote to Larvell, and this was back in March. And 7.5 months later, I get the self-addressed stamped envelope back to me, not with an explanation of his name, but with an autographed baseball card of his. So
he
it's like, well,
he didn't even read it. He just sent back a card.
Right. So, and I wrote to John Walkenfuss, and I was trying to get a more definitive definition and story behind Walkenfuss, because it has German origins, but depending on what part of Germany they were from, it had a different meaning. And I understand that Mr. Walkenfuss is not doing well physically and health-wise, and so I'm not surprised that I didn't get a response back from him. But there's a lot of detective work that has gone into this book in terms of reaching out to people and trying to find out. I did speak to the great-grandson of Kai Kyler, who was and Hazen Shirley Kyler.
I'd read and I'd always pronounce it Kiki for one reason.
Yes, and that is how most people pronounced it, but it's actually Kai. And his birth name. Yeah, his birth name was Hazen Shirley Kyler, and the Shirley came from his mother's name. And I spoke to his great-grandson basically because I wanted to determine whether the story of Kai came from whether he stuttered or not. That was one of the possibilities for the name Kai,
yes.
And it turns out that's not true. It was just...
Hazen means, in Yiddish, probably in German too, Hazen means pants.
Mm-hmm.
So, who knows? He may have stuttered and wet his pants.
Well, let's put it this way. That's not something that was imparted to me by his great-grandson. So.
Well, thank God his great-grandson doesn't have a crazy brain like mine, or he'd be spreading silly stuff all over the place. I don't know where that came from. But rest in peace, Kiki or Kai now.
Kai.
Now I will always remember that, because life's an education. You learn something every day, and there is no such thing as trivia. Trivia should have been named something else. Trivia implies trivial, and trivia, as we know it, is not trivial. It's very, very important. What goes on in people's heads is always important. There's no thought to be thought of as trivia.
I would tend to agree with you there, yes.
All right, that's my ramble for the day. Those trivia folks, gotta put a stop to it. Get those cameras off my lawn. You mentioned something a few moments ago. You had the ambition to get your name out there, and were looking for a vehicle to do so.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the other way around, but most people, if you talk to them, they say, well, I wanted to write a book, and they leave their ego out of it. And it's false ego. It's like false modesty. One does everything based on their ego.
Oh, yes.
And so to hide that, and most of us do. Well, I'm writing a book, but the reason we're writing a book, or singing a song, or writing a poem, is for mommy, look at me. That kind of thing, recognition.
Uh-huh.
And if one could keep that in mind, whoever you are out there, that that's what it's about. It is the vehicle and what you choose. That's just an excuse. To succeed in some way, you find a way to succeed, or become famous without being infamous, which always helps. That's just the way I look at it. I was very interested in that, what you said, and I'm going to ask you, if you didn't choose writing a book to get your name out there, what would have been the next choice?
Well, I want to step back for a moment and sort of piggyback on your comments regarding why we write and why we do these
anything.
things to get do anything.
Yeah.
Yes. Part of why I love to write is I feel like, yes, there's an ego thing. There is an ego satisfaction of what I have to say is important, and somebody is willing to read it and appreciate it and wants to and seeks it out. And I've had opportunities to write for ESPN.com and Baseball Prospectus, and I had an article published in the Sabre Baseball Research Journal, which went over very, very well. And coupled that with my frustration with my day-to-day job, which pays the bills but really doesn't satisfy my creative urges, that was sort of the impetus for, okay, writing makes me happy. What can I do to further this happiness and keep my happiness meter going? And so the book was sort of I had reached out to John Thorne and I said, John, I'm looking for writing opportunities. Can you help me out here? If you hear of anything, let me know. And so John, a couple of weeks later, got me in touch with a editor at a publishing house in New York that was looking for somebody to write a book on the history of the New York Subway Series, which would have been a terrific book to write. There's so much history there. There's so many stories there. But frankly, between my full-time job and the time frame they wanted the book turned around in, it just wasn't going to be feasible for me to do a good job on, and I would have felt like it was more of a onerous task than something I looked forward to. So I thanked the editor. I thanked the editor of the publishing house, and I politely declined. But I was still like, well, on my own terms, what can I do to satisfy my creative urges? And the urge to write my own book was the answer to that. To do it on my own terms, at my own pace, on my own, and self-publish, not having to be at the mercy of a publishing house with, yay or nay on my book proposal and things of that nature. That was very liberating. And so it freed me to just be expressive of myself. And if I wasn't writing, well, let's put it this way: I've done amateur stand-up comedy for a period of time. I used to sing in a choir. Again, these are things I did years ago. I've gone through different phases.
We have a lot of in common, I did comedy in the 80s and 90s.
Uh-huh.
And so I know the feelings that you went through preparing your act,
Mm-hmm.
doing your act, and coming down from your act.
Oh, yes.
Right?
The adrenaline rush of being up on stage and having the immediate response from the audience, and then when can I get my
next... And then thinking about it for another week until you get
Yes,
there.
When can I get my next hit? Yes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, unless you walk in somebody's moccasins, you really don't know what's going on. But you're a very interesting person. You go for it. That's something, like I said at the beginning, I talk to interesting people. The most of them have something that they're trying to do. Just looking ahead, no matter what their age, no matter what their situation, they're not resting on their laurels, and they're looking for something interesting to keep us. We all want to keep from thinking about the inevitable.
Right.
So anytime we can spend on something that gives us respite from that is well spent. Let's put it that way. And as for working for a living, you're exchanging time for money is all. Eventually, maybe this will lead to the time you're exchanging is the writing time for money, and that
would be nice. Like I said, the job. I consider myself a very creative person and a very sort of spontaneous, free association kind of person, and I'm always looking for something new and different to do and put my mind to and be creative about. And the job, my current job is, hello?
I'm here.
Okay.
Hello.
I'm always looking for some venue, some avenue to explore, to express my creativity. And it would be great if I could write for a living. Maybe in my retirement years I will be able to do so. I don't know if I can swing it just yet, but hopefully in the short term I will be able to.
Where do you suppose your creativity came from? Was it passed on? Was it nature or nurture? Let's put it that way.
Well, I would say I got a bit of my creativity from my mother. My parents were divorced. I resided with my mother. She brought me up in her household, and she had a wicked sense of humor. She liked puns. She liked wordplay. We played Scrabble. We played card games. She took me to the theater. She took me to movies. I was a bit of a culture vulture. I devoured anything that was British. I loved British comedies and British movies and things of that nature.
Obviously, you must love Monty.
Oh yes, Monty Python is when the DVD set came out of their complete series. When the DVD came out of their complete series, yes, I got that. So yeah, Monty Python is a huge part of my life, and so I would think that my mother has most of the genesis for my creativity, and then I was just part of it is, strangely enough, I was a Ritalin kid. I was always a little bit hyper as a child. I was always not able to sit in my seat for, extended periods of time because I was just bored. I was bored with school. I was bored with, I could do the multiplication tables in my head. I was gifted that way. A bit of a savant when it came to math and things of that nature. And I was bored at school, and so I was a Ritalin kid, and, a couple of times I got sent to the principal's office for mouthing off in class. But I was just bored, and I was frustrated by not being able to be more spontaneous and creative in learning about things and wanting to broaden my horizons. And so, it's the nature and nurture question. I think it's a little bit of both for me.
Okay. Being bored, you grew up in Jackson Heights, am I correct?
You are quite right, yes.
Did you go to junior high school 145?
I went to junior high school 10 in Long Island City, Horace Greeley Junior High.
Okay. Interesting.
I missed being zoned for 145 by like a block.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You missed out. That was the best school I've ever attended. Not that the bar was set pretty low with the New York City school system, but I got a lot out of junior high school, and what can I tell you? The school is set up to encourage boredom for creative kids, because everything is so rote and right down the middle that if you have creativity of your own, it's going to buck up against the school system in some way.
Yeah, and also everything is lately you're being taught to pass a standardized test. And so that in and of itself limits one's creative mind. It's like study these facts, study these names, study these dates, and then regurgitate it as, expeditiously and efficiently as possible.
And then forget it, and it doesn't matter because you passed the test, as opposed to teaching you something that can last you for a lifetime with the same 6 hours a day that you cooped up. So naturally you were bored. That goes with the territory.
Yeah.
So you taught me about Kai. Teach me give me one more lesson for the day.
Okay, there was a player for the Baltimore Orioles in the early 1980s, a short-term teammate of Cal Ripken's. And this player was a bit of a one-hit wonder, had a cup of coffee. His name was Drungo Hazewood, Drungo Hazewood. Drungo got his name.
I'm going to tell you something. Now, Drungo Hazewood, I can tell you 100% sure he was from Sacramento. Laval Banks, I think he was, but I don't know. But Hazewood was definitely from Sacramento. He was a catcher, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, he grew up to be an outfielder.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Larvell Blanks was born
I don't
in.
know what the hell I'm talking about, but
yeah, it's okay. It's okay. We'll let you pick.
Larvell Banks send you that thing from?
Texas.
Oh, okay. Well,
Larvell was born
in Sacramento.
Larvell was born in Del Rio, Texas.
Okay. Now, Hazewood, you could look that up. Hazewood was from Sacramento.
Okay.
I can't be wrong twice in one day.
Hazewood was actually born in Mobile, Alabama, but died in Sacramento, California.
A lot of people die in Sacramento. Let me say. I lived there for 7 years out of my adult life, and it had its upset. The weather was terrific in the summers. Hot summer evenings playing tennis. I love that. They're a little behind the times in terms of stuff.
Yeah.
Not a very liberal city.
Hazewood was born in Alabama but moved to Sacramento, California, and went to high school at Sacramento High. And then he was offered a full scholarship.
That's a high batting average.
Yeah. He was offered a full scholarship to USC as a tailback, and then he was the 1977 first-round selection by the Orioles. Well, the story behind Drungo, the name Drungo, is he was the second youngest of 10 children, and his mother was pregnant with what would turn out to be Drungo, and she arranged a foot race to the hospital for all of Drungo's siblings, and she said, whoever wins the foot race gets to name the child. So one of the siblings won the foot race, decided to name his new baby brother Drungo because it was the child's best friend's last name. So, yeah, just like, okay, it could have been Smith, it could have been,
it could have been Lipschitz.
It could have been Lipschitz, yes. Lipschitz Hayeswood would have been quite the name.
See? Thank God it wasn't Lipschitz. Ever made. Could you imagine growing every day? He's not going to make the baseball team at all. Lipschitz, you sit on the bench over there. Do your accounting. DB, you are a pleasure to talk to. Will you please come back and give us updates on how your book is going?
Oh, most certainly. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. And actually, it was the pleasure of my audii because you're fascinating and you got a lot going for you in life.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. We'll talk again, my friend.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. I am Ralph Tycho, the weak link of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, doing the best I can, though. Have a great one. I'll be back at you before you know it. Adios. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.